Slowly, but we're going to start on time because we have a packed program. Welcome, everyone. My name is Leonie Meyer. I'm the global lead on ecosystem restoration and grasslands and savannas at WWF International. And it's really a pleasure to be here moderating today with a great panel of speakers on this session on drought resilience, looking at it through an integrated landscape restoration approach. Thank you very much for joining here at the Restoration Pavilion and also online. I think we have a link to the outside world. And we want to have this as engaging as possible. So whoever's listening, can I just ask who has ever experienced drought, directly or indirectly? If you raise your hand. One person at least. There's a few people. Panel, all of you, of course. Well, yeah, in fact, today over 1.8 billion people worldwide are affected by drought, and projections indicate that these challenges will grow in the coming decade. So this is a really timely discussion and a really important topic that we're having. So we will explore how integrated or holistic landscape restoration can strengthen resilience to drought, safeguard biodiversity, support climate adaptation, and of course community well-being. The dialogue will focus on these interconnected themes and also looking at the relevance to land degradation neutrality and how, what the messages should be that we want to be bringing away from COP. So we have a really distinguished panel of speakers here. And let me just briefly introduce them one by one. So we have Victoria Gutierrez from Common Land. Victoria leads the global policy at Common Land with over a decade of experience in landscape restoration and reforestation projects across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And she's a seasoned expert in linking science, policy, and practice. Next, we have Bethany Walder. She's the executive director of the Society for Ecological Restoration, with 30 years of experience in ecological restoration, and she has co-authored many international restoration standards and advises on global restoration strategies. Then we have Tom Mewald from 1,000 Landscapes for 1 Billion People. He's the director of 1,000 Landscapes and coordinates global efforts to scale up landscape restoration. His background is in conservation planning and landscape ecology. And last but not least, Dr. Kagele Masso from CGIR. He leads CGIR's platform on environmental health and biodiversity with expertise in sustainable soil management and global agricultural initiatives. And he's also the Secretary General of the African Soil Science Society. Well, a lot of expertise here in the room, I'm sure as well. So we're hoping for good questions and a discussion from you. Let's start with you, Vicky. Let me sit down. So maybe first, for those that don't have an image of integrated landscape restoration, could you just briefly explain or maybe give us a picture of what it is? And then tell us, how does integrated or holistic landscape restoration address the risk of drought and their detrimental effects on people and nature, obviously?
Okay, thank you. Is this working? Yeah. Thank you so much, Leonie. It's wonderful to be here at the Restoration Pavilion, and it's great opportunity to talk about these issues from an integrated landscape perspective. So I'm really happy to be here with all of you. So holistic landscape restoration is very much an integrated approach to restoring landscapes. And so it is so integrated, of course, but when we also include holistic perspectives, we're really looking at a comprehensive way of integrating all the different issues that we want to address in landscapes, and do that from a systems perspective. And if we do that and apply that to land and ecosystem restoration, that if we do it well, We can see ways in which we can create resilient landscapes, ecosystems. We can mitigate the drought. We can prepare for drought. So we can address this problem from multiple angles. I work for Common Land. We're an international NGO based in the Netherlands. And we take a holistic approach to restoring landscapes. But in addition to doing all of this, for us, holistic approaches also means that we think about placing people first. And by doing that, we really need to think about what people need and what people aspire to. So that includes a whole range of issues such as jobs, such as people want communities, people want to live in connected places, people want to have purpose, sense of belonging, community. So think they want a prosperous future. So for us, it's very important to begin as a first step to think about what people want and need, and to engage with local partners in landscapes, and using that as a starting point, form partnerships at landscape level with multiple actors who can come together in a coherent way, integrated way, to really develop their own vision for their landscape. And we support this in different ways. But this, of course, is not an easy task. Landscapes show up in very different ways in different places. There are conflicts, there are different perspectives, there are different actors, there are different interests. So it means engaging and really committing for a long term, and we say a minimum of 20 years is necessary to do this, to then really promote these processes that support people in figuring out how they can develop a joint vision, how they can develop a shared understanding that is based on trust, because this really only works if people trust each other, if they're able to form a solid governance system, if they find ways in which they can share the vision, and so build on this vision, develop an implementation, and I know Tom is going to talk more about that, but really support people in driving and becoming stewards of the landscape. And by doing this, of course, water availability, water quality, access to water, all of these issues that are very important become part of landscape restoration. So it's very much an integrated approach where people have to be put first if we really want to succeed for the long term.
So just a follow-up question, like this stressing this integrated approach versus having doing restoration without including people and without really thinking of landscapes holistically, like what's the advantage of it?
So in my experience, I've seen many different landscapes in different places. Even if the right intention is in place, even if the design is very good, the technical design is very good, without people, without really considering what they're doing, how they're using the landscape, and what they want from the landscape, it doesn't work. So you can plant trees, you can restore wetlands, but if people need to use it, there are multiple examples in the literature where you can see that restoration efforts have not worked. So I think you need to really have people driving. And when people drive, then I think you don't need to do much else. They maintain it, they direct it, they improve it, etc.
Nice. Yes. So integration means really long-term, people-centered, people-driven. Bethany, let's move to you. You work a lot on standards. How can restoration standards really improve the outcome of landscape restoration, and specifically perhaps also on the issue of drought outcomes?
So this is working? Yes?
Yeah, you just have to.
You just have to talk, and it works. You don't have to press any buttons. It's very exciting. So I'm human just like everybody else. So I think in the context of standards, I'll actually start with the discussion you were just having about restoration needing to include people. So SER has issued the International Principles and Standards for the Practice of Restoration, and we've also worked in partnership with IUCN, Commission on Ecosystem Management, and Food and Agriculture Organization to put together the principles and then the standards of practice for the UN Decade on ecosystem restoration. And I'm not sure exactly which number it is in the UN Decade, but in the SER principles and standards, the first principle is that you need to engage all stakeholders. So we actually wouldn't call it restoration if it didn't involve people, because you can't. So just what Vicki just said, you know, if you don't involve and engage people in the process, you're not going to have a successful outcome. And so one of the things we do understand about restoration is that we're trying to restore dynamic ecosystems. And because ecosystems are dynamic and they're always changing, restoration itself is dynamic, and it also fails often. And we don't have a lot of flexibility to afford a lot of failure in the restoration space. That's a challenge for restoration. So we believe that using standards to implement restoration can help us control those things that humans can control, so that it's less likely that the restoration project will fail. Because of the dynamism of ecosystems, there's a lot of stuff we can't control, and standards won't ever solve any of that. Is it going to rain? Is it not going to rain? Is there going to be a flood? Is there going to be a tornado? Is there going to be a locust swarm? What's going to happen when you do your restoration? Certain things we can account for, and by using standards, we can significantly reduce the uncertainty associated with restoration, and we can reduce the likelihood of failure. And that is going to increase the return on investment. And we have very limited dollars to do restoration, so we need to get the greatest in return, ecological return, and social and human health and well-being return on the restoration that we implement. And our feeling is that standards are one of the best ways that we can reduce that risk and uncertainty and increase the return on investment. And I think I'll stop there, and maybe we can talk about that more as we hear from our other colleagues.
Thank you, Bethany. And yeah, we'll come to examples also in a second. Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, no, great. My name's Tom Newald, and I work for Eco Agriculture Partners. I am the director of an initiative called 1,000 Landscapes for 1 Billion People. And kind of building off what Vicki was talking about, we really see, it's not so much that, there's a lot of things that make drought. It's kind of a climate-driven thing in many ways, right? It comes in cycles, and it's more. Some places are more potentially resilient to droughts. Some places are potentially more prone to droughts. But we also know that there's things we can do within our landscapes that make areas more resilient to drought. For example, there's things happening in the upper part of the watershed that influence the lower part of the watershed. There's trees that are planted maybe in the upper part that are sucking water from the water table. Invasive species may be a part of that. And we kind of see, as we look at landscapes, drought is just one of many crisis points that are happening in our landscapes around the world. We kind of think about landscapes and kind of the state of what we see with climate and drought and invasive species is kind of this thing that we call the polycrisis. And so we need to start thinking about solutions, and I think that's why we're all here today, is what are some solutions, what we call polysolutions, or things that can infect many of these things all at once. And we see landscape partnerships in particular. We see a landscape approach bringing people together across there's no one person that owns a landscape, right? It's typically there's governmental actors, there's large landowners, there's a lot of small landowners. There's how do you start to develop a partnership around a particular landscape? And what 1,000 Landscapes is really focused on trying to get at Bethany's point too. There's some good standards, there's some good practices, there's some good ways of putting together a landscape partnership. And that's really what 1,000 Landscapes is trying to do is we know that this ask that we're making of landscape partnerships to do these things across big scales, across these timeframes of 20 years is a big ask to ask any local group to, hey, impact this large scale, do something that you've never done before under these kind of drastic conditions. So we know this is a challenge. So what 1,000 Landscapes is all about, and working with groups like Common Land and others, Conservation International is one of our partners, UNDP. There's some, we basically got together as a group and said, there's things that we need to do for landscape partnerships that will make them stronger, that will make them be more powerful than they are. And we're all kind of doing things in our little silos. And why don't we act as a partnership in ourselves, and let's co-create these tools and resources that landscape partnerships need. So we really became focused on what is the user journey of a landscape partnership from the start to the point where they develop a plan, where they develop their partnership, to the point that they're ready to do some of this amazing stuff on the ground. And so what we have been doing is developing a set of resources and tools such as learning modules that support landscape partnerships. We have a digital system called Terrasso that is made to promote good data collection so landscape partnerships can monitor their landscape. And we also are thinking about the finance. We know that doing this is it's going to take a long time frame, and it's going to take a lot of resources and money. So how can we start developing these innovative landscape finance portfolios that will actually get the work done? So just to kind of reiterate the other speakers, we're very much focused on this partnership idea, and we know that there's these best practices and standards that these partnerships need to work from. So that's I think my pitch to you all is that it's really about developing the strength of these local groups to do great things on the ground, and that's one of the things that we should be focused on.
So just a follow-up question, Tom, how you talk about partnerships, how does it work? Like, do you work with partners then in different countries in the landscapes? Like, how do you basically bring in these local perspectives from local communities who are working and living in the landscapes?
Yeah, well, we work with people who want to work with us in landscape partnerships. We spent the last 3 or 4 years co-designing, co-developing different tools and resources with different landscape partnerships around the world, South America, Africa, Asia. And right now we're in this phase that we want to think about scaling across broader landscapes.
Great, thank you. And talking about tools, I think that leads me nicely to Kargele. Can you share a few examples of research products, tools developed by CGIAR that address drought resilience through integrated landscape restoration? What was your experience with that?
Hope I can use the technology. I think it's working. Yeah, no, thank you very much really for the question. But before I go to the question, I go back to really the critical need to make sure that whatever we do in landscape restoration, it has to be community-led. And to be community-led, you have to involve all the critical stakeholders. Talking about that, we have really innovated the way we do research at CGIAR. We used to do research where you go, you bring a team of scientists together, you get your work done, you get your scientific publication out, and you celebrate. But we realize that it does not take you to impact. So we are trying to do real research, participatory research, so that the stakeholders are involved, so that we can get to impact. Then I can be able to share a few examples of things we do. One of the good example is probably the genetic innovations. How do we talk about the communities understanding the landscape, understand the kind of crop material, planting material that exists, try to dig into the history, what they think can survive in bad conditions, especially when we talk about droughts, and take that information and using it in our breeding systems. That is an example. The other is really trying to see the work we have been doing so far that has translated in a good scientific publications. How do we translate into practices? Here I want to give an example of conservation agriculture. How do we make sure that all the knowledge that has been generated is brought to the attention of the community with some demonstrate cases? It's really very important. Seeing is believing. So having some demonstration sites showing how these are working in terms of long-term trials and so on, so that people can see the beauty of, for instance, conservation agriculture, minimum tillage, with the carbon storage, which would have contribution in terms of water retention, and that can make a difference. Yesterday, we were talking about enablers of agri-food system transition, and we got a good example from Zimbabwe of people who have been able to adopt conservation agriculture and how they have been able to cope with the El Nino-induced drought compared to those who were just doing conventional agriculture. And this also takes us really to some of social games. How do we bring social games relate to water so that it can inform some of the practices we do in terms of water management? I will not tell you in which year, but I did my undergraduate studies in China. I was going to say many years, then you can guess. But the first thing I saw was when I entered my room was water saving, but this time in Chinese, really water saving. For those who want to practice Chinese, it's Jieyue Yongshui. How do we make sure that we use water in a very efficient manner? So how can we translate that into the community so that everyone who's using water knows that each drop counts? When we do irrigation systems, instead of pulling water, how can we think about water saving systems like drip irrigation, if I can give an example? As a native of Africa, in some parts of Africa, we get a lot of rains, heavy rains. If we were to harvest all that water, I do believe we will never talk about droughts in Africa. But unfortunately, very few countries have systems in place to allow that water harvesting. What happens a week after the rains, you get crop failure, crop dying because of the lack of water. What can we do as we talk about integrated landscape management, having system in place that allows us to do that good job? Talking about this, really, we have serious problem of economic water scarcity in some part of the world. Yes, for others, we know it's physical water scarcity. The water simply is not there. But others, the water is there. What can we do? If I will take you back again to my continent in terms of really some of the infrastructure. Less than 7% of the farmers have access to water-saving irrigation systems. What are the systems we need to do that can contribute, even at the community level? That could be solar pumping systems. We believe, especially that we know that most of farmers are resource constrained, they will not be able to afford. So some of the innovations we have been testing is really how do we use community-based water pumping systems, but making sure that this, as we talk about system approach, thanks Vicky, how to make sure that we don't pump the water so that we deplete the underground water. Some systems have done it, doing irrigation, but without control systems in place, you were referring to standards, indicators, metrics, making sure that as we try to solve a problem, we are not creating another. So how do you make sure that you have a water use system that are combined by measures, that is the education of communities, that allows us to make sure that there is a good discharge of the systems. Maybe not to take too much of your time is, another point I would like to make is water saving, water recycling. We get a lot of water wastage in cities because we call it wastewater. But if you travel around the world, you will see that others are able to treat that water and be able to use it in the systems. Some of the good examples in the MENA region with the CADRA are happening in terms of educating, in terms of improving the water use efficiency, the water treatment, so that we can also use the wastewater in our system. And that calls for really technology transfer and cooperation in our posture. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kagele, for these super interesting examples and also how it's applied in countries that you've seen around the world. I think that water recycling, that's really really interesting point that I haven't really heard before on when we talk about restoration, keeping in mind that we actually also oftentimes mean management, that it's also a lot about managing resources, managing, land use and so on. So thank you really much for bringing up that point. I would like to actually open up now, after we've heard from all speakers, to the audience and see if you have any questions for our panelists. Yes, please. There should be a microphone coming up.
Good afternoon.
Can you briefly introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I'm Joseph Mbokani. Joseph Mbokani from DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm working with emergency of DRC. I'm very interested for what you were talking about, water saving. Yes, because you said that after raining, especially in Africa, in some countries, people does not have the mentality of saving water. So I would like to know how the saving water in matter of technology, what is the relationship between saving water and integrated escape restoration approach. So for those who are not informed on how they can save water, what can we do so that we may save those water? Because I'm come where it is raining often, but people does not know we can save those water, because in our hands we think that as long as we do have a lot of rivers, we cannot save water, and then people does not practice the irrigation in agriculture in most side of my country. So what can you please help us by saving water in terms of technology? Thank you so much.
Yes, we'll take another question. Thank you, from the lady in the back.
Okay, thank you. My name is Nayan and I'm coming from Kenya. I work with Paran Women Group. And my question goes to the last person there. You talked about the community water pumps. I want to know how those community water pumps work. Thank you.
A lot of questions to Kagele.
Yeah, thank you very much. All interesting question. I will give you an example not far from DRC of friends of mine who used to work for ICN and retired and went into their communities, schools, hospitals, because if you use your only single house, sometimes you don't get much, and you have the community gardens, and they are able to produce Irish potatoes in the dry season. I'll give you more details after the session. So it's really a matter of education. Fortunately, in our science program, we are going to initiate a science program on what we call malfunction landscapes. And that one is, as I talked about, our innovations, because I can tell you that I have a lot of things to criticize in the way we used to do research before. But with the participatory approach, the consultative approach, one of the critical issues we want to address is really the water wastage. The same thing goes as we talk about really grasslands. When you get a lot of rains and then you are not able to cut the grass and develop technologies for grass conservation so that you can feed the animals during the dry season. These are all missed opportunities that we want to explore in the multifunction landscape program. It will be in DRC, it will be also in Kenya, so I'm safe in terms of doing it together. Talking about the community now, in terms of water harvesting, if you are from Kenya, you are not far from, probably you know a bit of Kiambu, you know about Bakweni. There have been really community systems put in place. Those does not mean that the water harvesting is going to, you will distribute in the whole community, but you get a demonstration site where community comes together and learn how to do it. So you get all the school harvesting of the water, then you get the companies, if you have heard about Sea Shape, they are really supporting farmers in there. making sure that they do the water harvesting and they bring the community to learn from it and try to duplicate the same in their communities. That is what I was referring to. But the other country I gave you is distributed because they have settlement of people. It's not a village, it's not a city, but people living together. They take the water they harvest from the schools, from the hospital, and they use it for community gardens. We can discuss it over later on. But the Ndeya and Makweni examples are examples that we should be following.
Thank you very much, Kagile. Anyone else has a comment to these questions? Then I actually want to come back with another round of questions to the panel. We've heard some examples, but you all have a lot of experience in restoration, integrated landscape restoration. You've seen many things. From your experience, what are some good examples in practice of integrated landscape management, specifically on, promoting drought resilience, and can they be scaled? Do you want to start, Vicky?
Okay. Before I reply, can I just maybe make a comment to? We were basically, most of us were in Colombia at the CBD COP. Colombia is a water-rich country. And yet in Bogota, they have water shortages. So there's one day a week where you don't have any running water. So if you go on that day to the National Museum, it is closed because of water. I then went to the Amazon, and this, of course, enormous river, massive water. And yet, local people, indigenous people are talking about water scarcity. So I think when we talk about drought, we really need to think about a whole range of different contexts, not only dry lands, right? This is really affecting, has huge effects globally, I would say. In terms of examples, there are, I can think of many examples, but I think I'm going to refer to one of the landscapes that we are partnered with in South Africa. So in South Africa, we partnered in an area in Eastern Cape, in the Baviaanskloof and the Langskloof. These are very important wilderness areas. They have very rich biodiversity. They have the succulent fynbos, which is unique, the karoo shrubland, unique species that you can only find in that area. It's one of also the poorest socioeconomically area, low population density, etc. So the Baviaanskloof and the Langskloof, they're valleys that run in parallel. So they're really not one landscape, they're separate landscapes. But we've been working in that area, and some of our partners work across the two areas. And so we support a network of actors, local actors that include NGO, Living Lands. They're doing a fantastic work, but also regenerative businesses and ecological restoration implementers. There's DEFCO, there's the Honeybush Company. So they work with wild harvesting of commercially valuable species to be able to retain the vegetation, this unique vegetation. Otherwise, it's going to be animals, livestock grazing, and then we've lost this valuable area. So it's a network of actors that have come together in a very coordinated, integrated, and coherent way, and they do a whole range of actions. I think it's also important to say that collectively, the Baviaanskloof and the Langskloof have 3 water catchments, which feed the nearest town, which has 1.3 million people. So it's important water source for a very large area. This is Kibetsa. I'm very bad at pronunciation. It's the old Port Elizabeth. And it's also a very large area of citrus production, so economically also relevant. But within the landscapes that we support, they're doing a whole range of activities that we often don't think water conservation initiatives specifically. So, for example, invasive alien species are really important. So to manage, control them, eliminate them. And we're partnered with university departments who have found biological controls of these invasives. But these are important for water because they of course affect the local vegetation that is well suited for drought and fire management. And so what they're observing is more and more drought, floods, fires. And so by managing some of these challenges, that it has positive outcomes for drought and water management. So in addition to all of these ecological restoration actions, they are also working to create regenerative businesses. They're working with local farmers and landowners in ways that they can develop this joint plan. For the long term, they're trying to insert wildlife. These areas are all fenced up, and I think that's a huge barrier for wildlife management. So you have literally fences going all the way up to the ridge. So it's quite unique in South Africa to see that. And so it provides unique challenges, and you need to really engage local farmers in trying to find ways that create this connectivity at landscape level, and that create this coordinated action. So I think they're doing a fantastic job. It's, of course, a process, but they're very creative. They also do activities that support other local communities. Of course, this is an area that has huge inequality challenges. So how do you break those divisions? And so they're coming from very different angles that ultimately deliver for water management alongside all these other, hopefully, benefits.
Thank you, Vicky. And I think your example really showed that it's never easy. It's never like straightforward. Restoration is always really complex, especially when you have users, when you have people who also live off the land. You have to create the business case for it. So thanks so much for providing this really good example. Bethany, I heard you speak about beavers before. Do you want to tell us about it?
I can tell you about beavers, but I actually want to build on Vicky's example first, because I don't know if there's anybody here. Actually, I'm not sure where everybody is from, even on our panel, but the South Africa example is a really, really important one when you look at water scarcity. And I think to look at this idea of actions, the government also implemented the whole Working for Water program in South Africa. And that program is all about employing local people, not long-term, it's short-term employment, but short-term employment for local people that's also focused on restoration through invasives removal specifically. And the work, there's been assessments by the Nature Conservancy, which is also duplicating and amplifying that work similar to what you're doing. And they've found that in terms of bringing back flowing water and water in Cape Town, that doing that invasives removal is much less expensive than desalination plants and creating the same amount or more water naturally. So these nature-based solutions that we're doing through restoration have the potential not just to provide jobs for people, but to create water security in water scarcity. And why is that water disappearing? In part because of all these invasive species. So restoration there has become very, very focused on, one of the things is invasives removal. And it's been extremely effective, in terms of bringing the water table back. And for those who are there, SCR held our world conference there during the water crisis in the late 2010s, when they were looking at a 0 day when there'd be no more water for Cape Town. And so it's very, very serious issues that we're talking about. Sao Paulo has faced those same 0 days for water, and issues related to how is the hydrologic cycle breaking in South America. So I think these are huge issues. In North America, I'm going to talk about a different example. North America, the entire landscape of North America, almost the whole country, was partly engineered by one animal, which is the beaver. And white people pretty much extirpated the beaver from North America, and in so doing, we broke a lot of the hydrologic cycle and really disconnected the streams from the adjacent groundwater. And so there's been a big effort through rewilding to bring beavers back into the landscape as landscape engineers. And some recent studies out of Idaho have found that where beavers have been brought back specifically by ranchers, by people who are grazing cattle and they don't have enough water during the drought era of the year. We have very, very dry periods in the Intermountain region of the North America, that basically they've increased stream flow 40 days longer per year by bringing beaver back. So what happens when you bring beaver back into the landscape? They build these dams all over the landscape, and then that pulls the water, and then that rebuilds the groundwater table adjacent, and you can reconnect and recreate wet meadows that used to exist. So in this area in particular that I'm talking about, the wet ecosystems comprise only 5% of the landscape, but they support 90% of the species in the dry systems or in the dry season. And so we have a lot to really think about there. And beavers are basically helping keep the land wet for much, much longer. And when we talk about scaling, which was one of the questions, there's just one very small example from this study that says they reintroduced beavers to 0.5 kilometer, and within a year or two, beavers were then had restored the stream across a 5 kilometer area. So they're really increasing mesic vegetation persistence. And just to finish, there's a lot of fun things people talk about with beavers. So I know beavers aren't on every continent, but they are on a few. And what's happened, you had a lot of people who were very opposed to beavers, and now you have all these ranchers who have become beaver believers. And it is creating a system of beaver fever in Western North America. So with that, I'll turn it over to my Washington compatriot who's from the same region.
Yeah, no, that's great. You set me up perfectly, because I was going to talk about beavers too, actually. And but now, yeah, I mean, you're the actual species you're bringing in. I worked in the Pacific Northwest, and the arid part of Pacific Northwest in the John Day Basin. You probably don't know where that is. You do. And so it wasn't so much that we brought in beavers. That's some landowners don't want beavers on their land, to be honest. There's reasons why they were extirpated. But one of the things, and which I don't agree with, but one of the things that people have been doing at scale, and this kind of gets at kind of the principles of restoration for landscape work, is that it should be, it should be the right technology. It can be low tech and low cost, effective measures to bring back streams in arid areas. In the Pacific North, in the John Day Basin, one of the big problems was we had these intermittent streams that would go dry in July, August, September for many months, and there would just be no water there. So instead of bringing beavers back, which I think that they are doing, they're doing the beaver dam analogs. They're basically creating the same structures at scale at a very low cost. You're basically doing the same things that Bethany was talking about, causing the same ecological effects by humans engineering rather than beavers engineering these streams. And it's quite inspiring to see over 5 years you'll have these streams where there'll be water in them year round because of this basically easy engineering of putting some sticks in the river and then letting that kind of build up and have that same effect of a beaver dam. And it's quite inspiring to see that, and to have it be done with across a whole watershed for less than a few $1 million. So in the United States, that's very cost-effective and low-tech way of doing landscape restoration. And the state, which is an endangered species, would then be more prevalent and thrive in those landscapes too.
And I'll just add that one of the things they're starting to see in the dry area of the West is that these ranchers who have been opposed are becoming more supportive because there's grass on the ranches that have beavers and there's no grass on the ranches without beavers in the dry season. And so their cows have food. What do you want? You want your cows to have food, right?
Bring back the beavers.
Win-win solutions. Kagile?
Yeah, so I think it's building on what colleagues have said, and I mentioned it earlier. We talk about restoration and how this can help us with the drought resilience, which is somehow about environmental sustainability. But people will always ask you, what is there for us? So we still have to meet food security, we still have to improve livelihoods, we still have to bring it a bit of social inclusion. And what I can bring really in terms of innovation is a kind of social innovation, is what we call agro-ecosystem living labs, making sure that we bring communities together, be able to discuss what are the critical challenges, what is the vision. We talk about drought, so there is an issue of a drought, how they want to see addressing the drought through nature-based solutions where they can still meet the needs. And now try to bring really the scientific community, the cooperation within the living landscape, and see how we can make the change together based on information from the grassroots.
Thank you, Kagele. Yeah, great example of bringing back the communities and the importance of community-led restoration. I think we can open for another round of questions. Yes, please, the gentleman, microphone is coming.
Yeah, I'm Richard Thomas from the United University, but I've worked in the 2 CGIAR centers. So, sorry, my question is to my colleague from the CGIAR. Where if we're now emphasizing more bottom-up community-based work, farmers have been breeding their own crops for millennia, adapting to the conditions, including drought, but obviously they don't have access to the enormous germplasm banks that the CGIAR has. So I'd like to know what's the status of participatory plant breeding. In other words, working alongside farmers, either directly or through their NARS, their National Agriculture Research Systems, to work more directly with farmers so you can bring in certain genes that they don't have access to, but get the farmers to actually do the breeding in their communities.
Can we take one more question and then... Yes, please, here in front.
Yes, my question is to you. As you give us an example of South Africa for what you're working with farmers and communities. So I would like to know how, because we are trying to work with kids in different schools or in DRC in our side on how we can restore the ecosystem due to the inundation. So how can you please include the approach of ecological restoration with children? How does it work? Thank you so much.
So let's start with Kagele on the participatory plant breeding.
Yeah, thank you very much. That is an excellent one. And it's also timely, because if it was last year, probably I was going to have hard time to answer it. But we are kind of revisiting the CGI science program. And now we have a program on breeding for tomorrow, combining the breeding and the gene banks to make sure that the gene banks are really used in the interest of the farming communities. And probably you may heard there was a session on, it was even yesterday, about the vision on adapted crops and soils. We have realized that the way we do our farming systems, is conducive to biodiversity loss. And that's the vision for adapted soils and crops, making sure that what we used to call orphan crops, opportunity crops, are given enough visibility. And that will be the participatory research where really farmers are involved in terms of trying to make sure that we inform, even for things that we have unlocked, because probably we moved to rice, we moved to maize, we moved to wheat, try to do based on the periodic table or food initiative, making sure that we even educate communities in terms of the nutritional values of what they have on the farm. And I hope things will change in the right direction. Thanks for amazing question.
Thank you. And Vicky, quick answer.
Okay, quick. This is a very important but very difficult question in South Africa. In many other places, it would be more straightforward because a lot of the integrated activities would include education, school awareness. So you work with the schools. In South Africa, of course, there are decades of systemic separation, segregation between communities, black, white, colored. So they have, they call them colored. Yeah. So then how do you break these systemic silos? It is a challenge. But one of the things that they're doing is they've created a separate place for after-school activities for black and colored children to integrate with also white children. And what they're seeing is that children are coming from further and further places to join these activities. So there can be all sorts of activities from nurseries, from interactions, from a whole range of activities. But once this was set up, they also saw that adults wanted to use often very basic services like writing letters or using emails or having access to basic utilities. But I think this has been very useful, successful, but still very small scale. So I think there has to be ways of bridging these different silos and thinking very carefully how to do that. But it's not easy. So it's first steps.
It's never easy with landscape restoration. Okay, as we conclude today's dialogue, this session, firstly, thanks so much to our great speakers here. I think the session has really reinforced the importance of integrated landscape restoration as a solution, as a nature-based solution. We've heard many examples from invasive species, removal of invasive species in South Africa, to beavers in the US, to water recycling in the MENA region and beyond. So I think it just shows that it's never this one solution, one size fits all. We have to look at the context. We have to work in partnership. It has to be community driven. So thank you. And thanks for the great questions as well. It was very enriching discussion and I've learned a lot. So I'm going away with a good feeling. Thank you.